28th of March 2017, Kaunas, Lithuania. The early morning calm was shattered by the thunderous roar of boots pounding against concrete. Heavily armed special forces stormed a dimly lit hideout, their shadows flickering against the bare walls. Inside, seated on a threadbare couch, a half-dressed man froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. Within moments, he was forced face down on the floor, the cold steel of handcuffs biting into his wrists as officers swept through the room like a tidal wave of authority. For James Mulvey, this cramped, stale space felt like the walls of a prison closing in, a grim foreshadowing of what awaited him. This was the dramatic end of a man who built his empire on deception and fear. Known across Europe as the Ghost, James Mulvey had lived a life more myth than reality, evading capture with an almost supernatural cunning. His sprawling operations spanned continents, employing smugglers, bribing officials, and devising ingenious methods to keep his enemies, law enforcement included, at bay. But behind the legend lay a man consumed by paranoia, even as he revelled in luxury. In Marbella, his Porsche Cayenne gleamed under the Mediterranean sun, a shining emblem of success and hubris. His villas, adorned with marble floors and infinity pools, masked the unease that plagued him. CCTV cameras lined every corner, tirelessly scanning for threats, real or imagined, as Mulvey's world became a gilded cage. After years of running, his luck finally ran out. The question remained, how did Mulvey rise to the top of this treacherous underworld, and what led to his downfall? This is the story of how the Cocaine King of Solihull built an empire that shook communities across borders, and how it all came crashing down. James Mulvey grew up in Solihull, a charming market town that seemed worlds away from the gritty streets of Birmingham. Yet, even in this tranquil suburb, cracks of ambition and rebellion began to show. As a child, Mulvey displayed a fiery determination on the football pitch and, later, in more dangerous pursuits. On the surface, Solihull was a picturesque suburb, far removed from the shadowy underworld of crime. But for Mulvey, the town served as a starting point for a life that would eventually lead him to become one of the most wanted criminals in the UK. As a child, Mulvey was not unlike others in the area. He played football and even showed promise as a goalkeeper, making it into the youth ranks of Shrewsbury Town. By all accounts, he was a talented player with potential, but his love for football wouldn't last long. Ambition, impatience, and the lure of easy money led him to abandon any dreams of a legitimate future. Mulvey's first brush with the law came as a young man. His involvement in petty crimes marked the beginning of his descent into the criminal underworld. Solihull, while not a crime hub, was close enough to larger cities like Birmingham, where organised crime thrived. The connections he made there would eventually pull him into the world where narcotic, violence and corruption were the currency of power. Mulvey operated a haulage company named JBS Transport as a front for his illicit activities. This was one of many businesses he was operating to hide his illegal enterprise. While others saw trucks as a means to deliver goods, Mulvey saw a golden opportunity. His experience in the industry would later prove instrumental in building his smuggling empire. By the mid-2000s, Mulvey was no longer a small-time hustler. He had his set sight on bigger, more dangerous ventures. His story had just begun, but even in those early days, signs of his eventual notoriety were evident. For Mulvey, Solihull was the launching pad. Not a home, but a stepping stone on a journey to infamy. He had evolved from a small-time operator into one of the most influential figures in the narcotic trade. His key to success? A meticulous understanding of logistics, a network of international connections, and an uncanny ability to stay ahead of the coppers. Mulvey's smuggling operation revolved around the use of haulage companies. With his background in the transportation industry, he recognised its potential as the perfect cover for narcotic trafficking. Trucks carrying seemingly legitimate goods would also transport massive quantities of coke and cannabis. Hidden in industrial rollers and other unsuspecting containers, the narcotics would move undetected through the UK, Ireland and beyond. The operation was highly sophisticated. The narcotics, primarily sourced from the Netherlands, were routed through Belgium before being smuggled into Britain. From there, they were distributed across Ireland, where they fetched astronomical prices. The sheer scale of the operation was staggering. Over 15 trips, Mulvey's network moved an estimated £68 million worth of narcotics. Mulvey was not just a local criminal. He built alliances with international players, including those associated with the Kinahan cartel, one of the most fierce criminal organisations in Europe. These connections expanded his reach and solidified his standing as a key figure in the global narcotic trade. According to the National Crime Agency, Mulvey was a trusted associate of Thomas Kavanagh, a senior member of the cartel. These relationships gave Mulvey access to a steady supply of narcotics, as well as the muscle and resources needed to protect his operation. Yet, for all his cunning, Mulvey's operation wasn't foolproof. A Belgian warehouse worker grew suspicious after noticing the same metal rollers returning to the depot repeatedly. His tip-off led authorities to the interception of a shipment and the unravelling of Mulvey's network. In 2007, Belgian authorities intercepted a shipment containing 22 kilos of coke, 392 kilos of cannabis, and 10 kilos of cutting agents hidden inside metal rollers. The bust was a blow to the operation, but Mulvey managed to evade capture. While 5 members of Mulvey's crew were arrested and convicted in 2009, Mulvey himself managed to slip away. While the network members were sentenced to a total of 86 years in prison, Mulvey remained out of sight of the authorities. His movements were carefully calculated, and he avoided leaving any trace. His use of burner phones and his constant travel between Spain, Portugal, Brazil, and the UK made him incredibly difficult to track. Mulvey's ability to stay in the shadows earned him a reputation as a ghost. He operated without leaving much of a paper trail, avoided conventional bank accounts, and used unregistered pay-as-you-go phones that he frequently changed. His movements were just as elusive. He rarely stayed in one place for long, often checking into hotels under aliases and paying in cash. Despite these precautions, Mulvey's name began to surface in police investigations. His role as the controlling mind behind the smuggling operation became clear, yet for years he remained untouchable, a phantom at the centre of a web of crime that spanned continents. Mulvey's rise to power was marked by a cunning, ruthlessness, and a willingness to exploit anyone who could serve his interests. As James Mulvey's illicit enterprise grew, so did his taste for luxury. His life became a glaring contradiction, part gangster, part mogul. While operating in the shadows, he lived openly as a wealthy jet-setter, indulging in extravagance that rivaled the most flamboyant crime lords. But beneath the veneer of wealth, paranoia consumed him, and his attempts to stay ahead of the law shaped every aspect of his existence. Mulvey indulged in a life of excess, residing in a €1.5 million villa perched on the sun-soaked hills of Marbella. This lavish estate was more than just a home. It showed his seemingly boundless wealth. The villa boasted a private cinema for late-night screenings, an infinity pool that seemed to merge with the Mediterranean horizon, and an elevator to whisk him effortlessly between floors. His driveway was a showroom of high-end cars, including Land Rovers, Mercedes, and a Porsche. To complement the image, Mulvey adorned himself with Rolex watches and other luxury accessories, flaunting his ill-gotten gains with the flair of a man who thought himself untouchable. His weekly expenditures were jaw-dropping. Mulvey reportedly spent around £75,000 a week funding not only his luxurious life, but also a debilitating coke habit that cost him £1,000 a week. His addiction contributed to erratic behaviour and heightened paranoia. Mulvey travelled extensively, hopping between countries and 5-star hotels. He was a fixture in elite circles, enjoying bespoke holidays and rubbing shoulders with influential figures. Mulvey employed a bespoke luxury packages holiday firm to make 22 trips for him over 4 years. He paid for these lavish vacations in cash, a practice that became a hallmark of his attempt to remain undetected by the authorities. But while Mulvey projected an image of untouchable wealth, his paranoia told another story. He was obsessed with staying off the radar. He avoided digital footprints, operated without a conventional bank account, and frequently used burner phones, which he changed as often as weekly. He even went as far as having his personal assistant buy phones for him to maintain anonymity. His paranoia also extended to his fear of betrayal. Mulvey was heard saying in a recording, "Do you understand how these people work? If they can't get to me, they kill the people you love." Here's what he said. Mulvey's paranoia also extended to his relationships. While he maintained a family life with 5 children and a wife who lived in the UK, his lifestyle led to strained connections. He was estranged from his wife and known to have multiple girlfriends, some of whom played a role in his downfall. One girlfriend, Alenia Xavier, testified about his violent tendencies, his coke use, and the darker side of his personality. Despite his best efforts to remain a ghost, Mulvey's lavish lifestyle was impossible to fully conceal. Each purchase, trip, and connection added to the mounting evidence against him. While he enjoyed the fruits of his empire, he was also sowing the seeds of his eventual undoing. On the other hand, the law enforcement was persistent. The National Crime Agency took over the case in 2015, launching a meticulous investigation that involved covert surveillance, mobile phone analysis, and the review of over 20 million documents. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of Mulvey's role as the mastermind behind a sprawling, lucrative narcotic empire. Despite his ability to evade capture for years, the walls were closing in. His elaborate smuggling operations, once thought untouchable, became the very blueprint for his downfall. By 2017, the walls were closing in. The ghost, once untouchable, had left just enough traces for authorities to follow. His paranoia, once his greatest shield, became his undoing. For over a decade, he had evaded law enforcement, operating under layers of secrecy and deception. But his cunning wasn't enough to outsmart a determined, multinational effort to bring him to justice. The ghost would finally be captured in one of the most dramatic stings in recent history. The National Crime Agency and their international counterparts meticulously pieced together his movements and connections. They uncovered evidence through covert surveillance, phone intercepts, and financial investigations. Even Mulvey's paranoia couldn't keep him completely off the radar. His frequent use of burner phones, constant travel, and cash transactions only delayed the inevitable. The operation to catch Mulvey was both vast and intricate, involving multiple countries and law enforcement agencies. Investigators tracked him across Spain, Brazil, Portugal, and Lithuania. In one instance, he was secretly recorded in a conversation that revealed his anxiety about the world he lived in. Speaking to his then-girlfriend, he said, "The life I lead, you never know what can happen. I do what I do, people try to kill me." It was in Lithuania, in the quiet city of Kaunas, that Mulvey was finally cornered. Acting on intelligence, Lithuanian special forces stormed his hideout in March 28, 2017. Armed officers surrounded his house and broke in. Mulvey, half naked, was sitting on a couch, utterly unprepared for the dramatic ambush. He was forced to the ground at gunpoint and arrested. According to Adam Warnock, NCA Birmingham branch commander, "We will never stop pursuing serious criminals like Mulvey and work with our international partners to ensure we track them down and bring them to justice." Following his arrest, Mulvey was extradited to the UK to face trial. His trial at Birmingham Crown Court was the climax of a decades-long pursuit by law enforcement. For the man who had lived as a ghost and thought himself untouchable, the court proceedings laid bare the full extent of his crimes and the intricate web of his narcotic empire. Mulvey faced 4 charges of conspiracy, 2 for importing coke and 2 for smuggling cannabis between 2006 and 2007. During the trial, the prosecution played covert recordings of Mulvey's conversations, in which he made incriminating statements about his involvement in the illicit trade. In one recorded discussion, Mulvey referenced his role in previous operations, saying, "Remember, I used to do bits and bobs for what Barry got nipped off in Ink Barrow, remember?" This statement directly linked him to Barry Phibbs, his key associate, who had been convicted years earlier. One of the most compelling testimonies came from Mulvey's former Portuguese girlfriend, Alina Xavier. Speaking via video link from Portugal, she detailed Mulvey's lavish lifestyle, his coke habit, and his violent tendencies. She also revealed how Mulvey had once destroyed narcotics by pouring them into a gutter after fearing she might report him to the police. The evidence against Mulvey was overwhelming, but his defence team attempted to portray him as someone who had exaggerated his involvement to impress others. The jury deliberated for several weeks before delivering a guilty verdict on all 4 counts. On June 13, 2018, Judge Mark Wall handed down a sentence of 32 years in prison, a punishment that reflected the scale of Mulvey's crimes and the misery they caused. Addressing Mulvey directly, the judge said, "You were involved in the large-scale importation of these drugs into this country from continental Europe and its onward transportation to Ireland, where doubtlessly it was to be sold on at a greater profit. You would have been acutely aware of the misery and ruined lives that this drug brings in its wake." Mulvey, who appeared defiant throughout the trial, smiled at his family members in the public gallery as the sentence was read, but there was no denying the finality of the moment. Even after his conviction, the investigation into Mulvey's network didn't end. Authorities continued to track the money laundering operations tied to his empire, seizing assets and identifying other individuals connected to his crimes. As for his international connections, Mulvey's dealings with the Kinahans were not without risk. In 2014, his cousin, Gerard Hatchet Kavanagh, was eliminated in Spain. The assassination sent shockwaves through the underworld and highlighted the danger of operating in these circles. In a covert recording, Mulvey reflected on this event, saying, "When we first started, there were 4 bosses. Me, Glasses, him, who's just got shot dead, and another kid." His partnerships extended even further, touching the shores of Spain, Brazil, and Lithuania. In Spain, Mulvey operated from a luxurious villa near Marbella, a region infamous for its ties to organised crime. This base allowed him to liaise with syndicates involved in narcotics manufacturing and distribution. Investigators revealed that Mulvey and his associates frequently travelled between Spain and the Netherlands to oversee drug deals and financial arrangements. Mulvey's connections were not just about narcotics. He cultivated relationships with individuals who could provide critical services, including money laundering and document forgery. His ability to move funds across jurisdictions and acquire fake identities enabled him to maintain a life of luxury while avoiding capture. Despite the secrecy surrounding his dealings, Mulvey's criminal web was unrivaled as law enforcement agencies across multiple countries pieced together his network. His partnerships with global crime syndicates showcased the interconnected nature of modern organised crime, where alliances span continents and operate with military-like precision. Mulvey's connections were a double-edged sword. While they amplified his power and reach, they also brought added scrutiny from international law enforcement. His case became a prime example of how transnational criminal organisations collaborate and the challenges they pose to authorities. The relationships he built across borders eventually became the threads that unravelled his empire. James Mulvey's empire was built on deception, smuggling and violence, but the cost of his success was staggering, not just for himself, but for everyone touched by his operations. Behind the lavish villas, luxury cars and high-end lifestyle lay a trail of destruction, affected families, communities, and even his own circle of associates. The first and most visible consequences of Mulvey's illicit empire was the human toll. His smuggling operations flooded the streets of the UK and Ireland with coke and cannabis, leaving addiction and shattered lives in their wake. Families were destroyed by addiction. The lure of quick money and power brought countless young people into the clutches of gangs, where violence became a grim reality for those involved in the distribution networks. Communities, particularly in Birmingham and the West Midlands, saw an uptake in crime and gang-related activities, with Mulvey's operations playing a significant role. Mulvey's brother and cousin were also casualties of his empire. Both were imprisoned for their roles in his operations, while Mulvey evaded capture while his associates faced the brunt of the law enforcement. This pattern of betrayal extended to his inner circle. Former girlfriends, once part of his glamorous world, testified against him in court, exposing the violence and paranoia that defined his relationships. One ex-girlfriend, Alina Xavier, described her time with him as a nightmare, saying, "He was using coke every day. I like it, but he was using so much he was getting paranoid." The paranoia that haunted Mulvey was a byproduct of his empire. As his wealth and influence grew, so did the number of enemies he made. Rivals sought to undermine his operations, and law enforcement agencies worked tirelessly to dismantle his network. To evade capture, Mulvey lived like a ghost, constantly on the move, staying in hotels and changing phones weekly. Despite his efforts, the constant threat of betrayal and arrest loomed large. Even Mulvey's personal health suffered as a result of his lifestyle. His heavy coke use, combined with the stress of running a global operation, took a toll on his mental and physical well-being. The cost of Mulvey's empire extended beyond the present, leaving a lasting legacy of fear and mistrust. His arrest did not erase the damage caused by years of unchecked criminal activity. Families continued to grieve lost ones, and communities struggled to recover from the violence and addiction he had fueled. Meanwhile, his associates, whether jailed or free, were left grappling with the fallout of his downfall. James Mulvey's story serves as a reminder that even the most powerful criminal empires are built on fragile foundations. For all his wealth and influence, Mulvey could not escape the inherent instability of his world. His empire came at a high price, one that he and everyone around him would ultimately force to pay. For over a decade, James Mulvey lived as a ghost, slipping through the fingers of the law enforcement while maintaining his position as one of Europe's most prolific drug traffickers. But while he remained elusive, the hunt for him never ceased. His eventual capture was the result of relentless efforts by law enforcement agencies across 9 countries, showcasing the level of coordination and dedication required to dismantle a global criminal empire. The National Crime Agency played a leading role in the investigation, spearheading Operation Sasak, the years-long efforts to track down Mulvey and bring him to justice. According to the NCA, our investigators worked with law enforcement partners in 9 countries to collate and analyse extensive financial and telephone evidence, which proved Mulvey was the mastermind behind the operation. The operation to capture Mulvey was as meticulous as his criminal enterprise, with officers tracking his movements across Europe and analysing patterns of communication. Mulvey's paranoia, which had served him well for years, was ultimately not enough to prevent law enforcement from closing in. Even after his capture, the NCA's work was far from over. Financial investigators continue to uncover the extent of Mulvey's wealth and the mechanisms he used to launder his profits. From offshore accounts in Mauritius to hidden properties in Spain and the UK, every lead was pursued. One investigator described Mulvey as a ghost who operated without conventional financial footprints, making the task of tracking his assets an immense challenge. Law enforcement officials who worked on the case often spoke of the satisfaction and significance of bringing Mulvey to justice. Andy Quinn, NCA Regional Head of Investigations, said, "Mr. Mulvey would classify himself as an iconic, untouchable criminal. The NCA and its partners have today proven that this isn't the case. We never give up on individuals like Mr. Mulvey. We have a long memory." The operation against Mulvey also highlighted the importance of international collaboration in tackling organised crime. Agencies from Belgium, Ireland, Spain, Lithuania and beyond work together, sharing intelligence and resources. This collective effort underscores the transnational nature of modern criminal enterprises and the necessity of a united front to combat them. For law enforcement, the case of James Mulvey was not just about taking down a single criminal, it was about sending a message to others who believed themselves untouchable. As Adam Warnock put it, "We will never stop pursuing serious criminals like Mulvey and work with our international partners to ensure we track them down and bring them to justice." While Mulvey's arrest was a significant victory, law enforcement officials remained realistic about the challenges of organised crime. The dismantling of his network was just one step in a larger battle, and the ripple effects of his operations continued to be felt. However, the success of the operation demonstrated the power of persistence and collaboration in the fight against crime. The arrest of James Mulvey marked a critical moment in the fight against organised crime. However, dismantling a criminal empire of his magnitude left a complex web of associates, operations and unresolved issues in its wake. The capture of its leader was only the beginning of unravelling Mulvey's far-reaching network. In the immediate aftermath after his arrest, law enforcement agencies across Europe and beyond launched investigations into his associates. Mulvey's closest allies, many of whom had worked alongside him for years, became the primary targets. 5 key members of his operation had already been convicted in 2009, receiving a combined total of 86 years in prison. Yet Mulvey's capture revealed the true scale of his operations and led to further arrests and convictions. One of the most prominent figures in his network was Barry Phipps, described as organiser on the ground. Phipps was instrumental in coordinating the logistics of Mulvey's narcotic smuggling operations, using fake identities and front companies to transport narcotics across borders. His conviction, along with that of lorry driver Jeffrey Edwards, highlighted the operational backbone of Mulvey's empire. Despite their incarceration, their influence lingered as the criminal infrastructure they helped build remained operational. The fallout from Mulvey's arrest also extended to his financial dealings. Investigators uncovered a network of shell companies, offshore accounts and hidden assets that allowed him to launder millions of pounds in drug profits. These discoveries led to the seizure of numerous properties, including Mulvey's €1.5 million Spanish villa, which symbolised his wealth and power. Authorities also confiscated luxury cars, jewellery and other assets by stripping away the material gains of his criminal life. Even as law enforcement dismantled Mulvey's network, new challenges emerged. His associates, both in the UK and abroad, sought to fill the power vacuum left by his capture. Rival factions jostled for control of the lucrative narcotic routes he had established, leading to increased tensions and violence within the criminal underworld. Mulvey's arrest also exposed the broader vulnerabilities within the systems he exploited. From corrupt port and airport workers to compromised government officials, his operation highlighted the ease with which organised crime could infiltrate legitimate institutions. This revelation prompted a re-evaluation of security measures, leading to tighter regulations and increased scrutinies of those working in sensitive areas. The human toll of Mulvey's network remained evident long after his capture. Families continue to grapple with the consequences of addiction and violence fueled by his smuggling operations. Communities, particularly in Birmingham and the West Midlands, face the daunting task of rebuilding trust and addressing the social issues exacerbated by his criminal activities. Despite these challenges, Mulvey's arrest served as a warning to others in the criminal world. His downfall demonstrated that even the most sophisticated operations could not evade the reach of international law enforcement. The coordinated efforts of agencies across multiple countries sent a clear message: no matter how untouchable a criminal may seem, justice will eventually catch up. In the years following Mulvey's capture, the focus shifted to preventing the resurgence of his network. Law enforcement continued to monitor his former associates, disrupting their attempts to re-establish operations. Meanwhile, the lessons learned from his case informed strategies for combating organised crime, emphasising the importance of collaboration, technology and persistence. While James Mulvey's empire may have crumbled, the scars it left behind remained. His legacy was one of destruction, greed, and ultimately a cautionary tale of the high price for a life of crime. The story of Mulvey is one that embodies the rise and fall of a criminal empire. His name, once synonymous with power and wealth in the underworld, now stands as a cautionary tale of hubris, greed, and the consequences of a life built on crime. Even in his downfall, Mulvey's legacy continues to resonate, both within the criminal world and in the efforts of law enforcement to prevent similar cases in the future. Mulvey's rise from a modest background in Solihull to the helm of a £100 million narcotic empire showcased his ambition and ruthlessness. He was a man who exploited every opportunity, leveraging global connections to build a transnational network that operated with the efficiency of a multinational corporation. His lavish lifestyle, a villa in Spain, luxury cars, and a coke habit costing him £1,000 a week epitomised the rewards of his success. But it also symbolised the arrogance that ultimately led to his demise. For law enforcement, Mulvey's capture was a victory, but also a stark reminder of the challenges they face. His operations exposed weaknesses in border security, the ease with which criminal networks can exploit global supply chains, and the dangers posed by corruption. In the wake of his arrest, authorities across Europe and the UK intensified their focus on preventing similar operations, implementing stricter regulations, and investing in advanced surveillance technologies. The international collaboration that led to Mulvey's capture became a blueprint for future operations. Agencies from 9 countries worked together to track his movements, dismantle his network, and seize his assets. This level of cooperation underscored the interconnected nature of modern crime and the necessity of a unified global response. Within the criminal underworld, Mulvey's downfall sent shockwaves. His once loyal associates faced a choice: adapt, flee, or risk a similar fate. Rival factions sought to capitalise on the void left by his absence, leading to power struggles and violence. Yet for all the turmoil his arrest caused, Mulvey's story served as a warning to those who believed themselves untouchable. For the communities affected by his operations, the scars remain. The drugs he trafficked devastated families, while the violence associated with his network created an atmosphere of fear and instability. Rebuilding trust and addressing the long-term consequences of his crimes is an ongoing challenge. James Mulvey's legacy is one of lessons learned, both for those who seek to emulate his criminal success and for the authorities tasked with preventing it. His story highlights the fragility of even the most powerful criminal empires and the inevitability of justice. As Andy Quinn of the NCA aptly put it, Mr. Mulvey would classify himself as an iconic, untouchable criminal. The NCA and its partners today have proven that isn't the case. In the end, Mulvey's life holds a lesson that no amount of wealth or power can shield someone from the consequences of their action. His rise and fall is etched onto the annals of crime history, a stark reminder of the relentless battle between law enforcement and those who operate beyond its reach. The story of James Mulvey, the so-called Cocaine King of Solihull, is a tale of ambition, greed, and inevitable downfall. From his rise to power as a criminal mastermind, overseeing a £100 million narcotic empire, to his ultimate capture in a dramatic operation, his life mirrors the archetype of a modern-day gangster. Mulvey's lavish lifestyle, funded by the misery of others, seemed untouchable at its peak, yet it was his own hubris and paranoia that ultimately led to his demise. Law enforcement's relentless pursuit of Mulvey serves as a beacon of justice, proving that even the most elusive criminals can be brought to account. His arrest and the dismantling of his empire were a triumph of international cooperation, an example of the strong dedication of the agencies that pursued him across borders. But beyond the headlines and the drama lies a warning. Mulvey's empire may have crumbled, but the devastation he left behind, addiction, violence and broken communities, remains to this day, showing the true cost of organised crime. His legacy is one of ruin, both for himself and those he ensnared in his web. As the curtains close on the brutal story of James Mulvey, one thing becomes clear. The wheels of justice may turn slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. His rise and fall stands as a warning to others who think themselves beyond the reach of the law, that crime may pay in the short term, but the ultimate cost is far greater.